Brian suggested that the hospital should be easy to reach on foot, as he surprisingly assisted Frances out of the vehicle. In these unexpected events, I found myself in the passenger seat, while Brian took control of the driving. We've reconciled with Dad, so we're off to enjoy a trip to Florida together. Just the four of us, he announced before we set off. This revelation left me speechless, struggling to process the sudden change. Frances's raspy voice pulled me back to the present. At that moment, nothing else seemed important except for getting her to the hospital. So I quickly hailed a taxi for her. Inside me, a fire of resentment ignited against Brian and his mother for their disregard for our family. I silently swore to seek retribution for their actions. My name is Lauren, a 40-year-old. My husband, Brian, is 42 and works in an office. And my daughter, Frances, who is 11, prefers the company of books during her quiet times. Due to my profession, my social life is quite limited. I've always prioritized my career over socializing. However, at the age of 31, I accompanied a friend to a matchmaking party where I met Brian. He shared his focus on work and how it led him to miss out on personal opportunities. We felt a connection and soon started dating, leading to our marriage and the birth of Frances. Our life took a turn when Brian announced his mother would be moving in with us unexpectedly. I was taken aback by this sudden decision, especially since I valued our family's privacy and space. Brian's parents had a fallout, and his mother decided to stay with us. I was hesitant about the arrangement, fearing the impact on our household dynamics. Brian's reaction to my concerns showed a hint of offense, interpreting my hesitation as a dislike for living with his mother. I couldn't openly express my reluctance due to fear of upsetting him, so I kept my objections to myself. In the whirlwind of these family dynamics, I find myself confronting the challenge of maintaining peace within our home while dealing with the unexpected arrival of Brian's mother and the unfolding events that test the strength of our family bonds. Brian firmly stated that I shouldn't argue back, confidently telling me to simply prepare a room for his mother. However, our living situation was complex. We were tenants, and adding another person to our lease required approval from the landlord, a process I would have to manage due to receiving housing benefits through my employment. Additionally, our apartment consisted of just 3 bedrooms, one for our daughter, Frances, and the other for us, leaving no extra space. Despite these constraints, Brian suggested, without concern, relocating Frances's study area to the living room. He rationalized this by saying it would allow us to monitor her homework more closely, arguing that a child in elementary school doesn't need a private room. This shocking proposal left me reeling. How could he consider prioritizing his mother's comfort over our daughter's well-being? Brian's lack of response to my objections, which I voiced multiple times, deeply frustrated me. When Frances came home, he promptly informed her that she would have to vacate her room for her grandmother. As Frances began to move her belongings, a mix of heartache and growing resentment towards Brian filled me. Recently, Brian had been neglecting both household responsibilities and contributing financially, often returning home late. I had tolerated his behavior for Frances's sake, but his recent actions felt like the final straw. Upon my mother-in-law's arrival, she immediately expressed dissatisfaction with our living arrangements, loud enough for neighbors to notice, putting me in an awkward position. I had clarified with the property management that her stay didn't require formal procedures, just a notification, hoping her visit would be brief. However, the size of her luggage suggested a lengthy stay, further disheartening me. She disregarded my feelings, inspecting our home and criticizing the lack of food in our fridge, insinuating I was failing to provide adequately for my family. Despite my plan to go grocery shopping, her unexpected arrival forced me to prioritize cleaning, leaving no time for the store. Brian's preference for takeout, accompanied by derogatory remarks about my cooking, had already discouraged me from making meals. When I suggested ordering food to appease the situation, my mother-in-law lashed out, dismissing the idea and imposing traditional expectations on me to cook a full meal immediately. Following her demands, she left me to manage alone, her laughter echoing from the living room as I prepared to shop in dismay. This series of events, marked by disregard for my feelings and the well-being of our daughter, intensified the strain within our household, leaving me to contemplate the dynamics of family, respect, and responsibility amidst challenging circumstances. Returning home to find Frances, diligently working on her homework in the living room under the critical gaze of my mother-in-law, was disheartening. Her harsh reprimands for any error Frances made, criticizing her as a disappointment, were painful to hear. I intervened, reminding her that educational standards have evolved, with children now learning subjects like English and programming from a young age. Despite my defense, my mother-in-law continued her disparaging remarks, wishing Frances had inherited more of Brian's intelligence. Witnessing Frances's spirit dampen, I reassured her to progress at her own pace, while casting a disapproving glance at my mother-in-law, who remained indifferent, continuing to snack as if to spite me. A week into my mother-in-law's visit, my patience wore thin. I confronted Brian, unable to tolerate his mother's behavior, particularly her detrimental impact on Frances. Brian's response, however, was dismissive. He downplayed the situation, attributing Frances's academic struggles to her inheritance from me, not him, which only intensified my resolve to stand up for our daughter. For the first time, I refused to back down. While my mother-in-law feigned helpfulness in Brian's presence, her actual contribution was non-existent, leaving me burdened with the chores. This pretense frustrated me further, highlighting Brian's obliviousness to the true dynamics at home. My confrontation with Brian reached a boiling point when I challenged his priorities, emphasizing Frances's well-being over appeasing his mother. Brian's retort, mocking my educational background in nursing compared to his college degree, was a low blow, suggesting a correlation between my profession and Frances's abilities. This comment deeply offended me, but I chose to respond with laughter, masking the hurt and anger simmering within. The situation escalated when Frances became unwell, showing symptoms of an illness spreading at school. As I prepared to take her to the hospital, Brian casually mentioned his impending trip to Florida with his parents, revealing his plans last minute. This disregard for our daughter's health and well-being was the last straw. In the chaos of trying to ensure Frances's care, Brian and his mother made a shocking declaration about the hospital's proximity, choosing to leave for their vacation without further consideration for Frances's condition. This act of abandonment in a moment of need was a stark reminder of the skewed priorities and lack of empathy that had come to define our household dynamics, prompting a deep reflection on the values and responsibilities we hold as a family. When Frances, with her voice filled with regret, brought me back to the harsh reality, I instantly knew what I had to do. Nothing else seemed important as I dialed for a taxi to rush her to the hospital. A surge of anger took hold of me, an anger I vowed to never let die down. Brian and his relatives couldn't have foreseen the lengths I would go to protect my family. In my heart, I blamed them for taking us for granted, seeing their actions as a betrayal. 2.5 hours later, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating with calls from Brian. Reluctantly, I answered, only to hear his desperate pleas for help following a car accident on his way to the airport. Despite having a license for a manual transmission, Brian's confidence had waned due to his regular use of public transport. Too proud to admit his apprehension about driving a manual car, especially in front of his mother, he found himself in a predicament. Although our insurance covered us both, the responsibility for the accident fell squarely on him since he had taken the car without my agreement. Brian tried to shift the blame onto the car, criticizing it for being difficult to drive and inefficient. However, his complaints fell on deaf ears. I reminded him that he knew the car was manual and had chosen to take it regardless. The accountability for the accident rested with him, not the car. I made it clear he would be responsible for covering the repair costs for both the car and any damage incurred, such as hitting a guardrail. As we arrived at the hospital, my focus was solely on Frances, who needed additional tests. The situation wasn't as simple as the flu that had been going around. I couldn't afford to be distracted by Brian's selfish demands, so I ignored his persistent calls. Then, a message notification caught my attention. Initially, I thought Brian's parents were siding with him, but while his mother sent frantic pleas, his father simply inquired about the situation. Curious, I responded to his father alone, which led to an unexpected revelation. Brian's father was unaware of any supposed trip to Florida, having spent the day with friends. The news of the accident, relayed by his wife, seemed like a plea for attention until he realized the gravity of the situation when Brian reached out. Confused about my selective responses, he reached out and I explained the full extent of the circumstances, his reaction to learning about his wife's. Stay with us, and the concocted story of a family trip to Florida revealed a complex family dynamic filled with misunderstandings and disconnects. The conversation with Brian's father unveiled a reality marked by separation, miscommunication, and the unintended consequences of actions driven by pride and negligence. As we navigated these revelations, the focus remained steadfastly on Frances's well-being. underscoring the paramount importance of family and the lengths to which one must go to protect and support their loved ones amidst turmoil. In a voice more somber than I had ever heard him use, Brian uttered "unforgivable," sending an involuntary shiver down my spine. Roughly half an hour after we ended our call, a doctor beckoned me to discuss Frances's diagnosis. She was suffering from acute gastroenteritis and needed to be admitted to the hospital for treatment. A wave of relief washed over me, tempered by guilt over the stress Frances had endured recently. Fortunately, a private room was available, offering her a quiet space to recover. "Frances, how are you feeling?" "We managed to get a private room so you can rest comfortably," I said, striving to infuse my voice with optimism. Frances's response was filled with regret, as she apologized, concerned about falling behind in her studies due to her hospitalization. I immediately comforted her, emphasizing that her value to me was not tied to academic success, but simply because she is my cherished daughter. The mood lightened when Frances's grandfather, with whom she shares a special bond, visited. His presence and reminiscences of Frances's achievements, like winning a drawing contest, brought a much-needed sense of normalcy and happiness to both of us. However, this brief respite was interrupted by a call from Brian and his mother, who were irate over missing their flight to Florida due to the car accident. They demanded I compensate them for the lost travel expenses for four, blaming me for their predicament. Brian's mother lamented the missed opportunity to mend fences with her husband, her loud complaints ringing through the phone as if on speaker. Just then, my father-in-law, who had come to support us at the hospital, casually remarked that he hadn't been informed of any trip to Florida, highlighting the exclusion of an extra person from their plans. This revelation caught Brian and his mother off guard, especially when they realized he was with me, prompting a scramble for explanations. Brian's mother hastily concocted a story, claiming the trip was meant to be a private affair between her and Brian, a clear attempt to backtrack on their earlier lies. Her feeble excuses only served to undermine her credibility further. I couldn't help but let out a laugh at the absurdity of their situation, marveling at how quickly their deceit had unraveled in the face of unexpected truth. Upon discovering the reservation for four on the travel booking site, it was clear that silence was their only defense. Frances had hinted at her grandmother meddling with my computer, sparking my suspicion. Indeed, a quick check confirmed that my mother-in-law had booked a trip for four under my name, with the charges already hitting my credit card. Brian's complaints about cancellation fees seemed ludicrous when I was the financial victim of their scheme. Their silence grew heavier when I questioned the identity of the third person, which Brian weakly attributed to a mistake. Determined to confront them, I arranged a meeting at a local diner, leaving Frances in the caring hands of the hospital staff. Accompanied by my father-in-law, we awaited Brian and his mother's arrival. Brian immediately began to complain about the guardrail damages not being covered by insurance, demanding I use mine. I was astounded by his nerve, reminding him of his responsibility for the damages due to his recklessness. My mother-in-law attempted to steer the conversation to why we were meeting. I seized the opportunity to reveal that the dashcam in my car had recorded not only Brian and his mother, but also an unknown young woman in the back seat. The footage, accessible through a high-tech app linked to my smartphone, inadvertently provided undeniable proof of Brian's infidelity. Their shock was palpable as I confronted Brian about his plans to take his mistress on the trip, thanking him sarcastically for leaving such clear evidence. I had harbored suspicions about Brian's fidelity and had considered divorce, but recent events, including my mother-in-law's intrusion and Frances's illness, had delayed my decision. The revelation led my father-in-law to comment on the unfortunate likeness between mother and son, exposing his wife's affair with a younger man. Brian, unaware of his mother's indiscretions, was visibly shocked, while my mother-in-law's embarrassment was evident for all to see. Fed up with the deceit and betrayal, I declared my intention to divorce Brian, demanding he cover child support, car repair costs, and the expenses for the aborted Florida trip, including those incurred by his mistress. Brian, faced with the gravity of his actions and the public revelation of his and his mother's affairs, bowed deeply, acknowledging the consequences of his choices in front of onlookers. Brian, feeling cornered, hastily offered to settle all expenses, imploring me not to reveal his secret. He confessed his affair was with a significant client's daughter who was oblivious to his married status. Intrigued by her fortune, my mother-in-law had recommended a joint vacation, thinking nothing of it. The young woman had genuinely believed in the trip, while Brian, basking in her admiration, had caused a car crash due to his careless driving. My father-in-law and I could hardly believe the foolishness that led to the mishap. Brian assured he would manage the situation with his mistress on his own, fearing the consequences at work if it came to light that he had misled the client's daughter. He pleaded for my discretion, claiming his past support in our marriage earned him some mercy. I agreed, but made it clear he had to comply with my terms, emphasizing there would be no room for forgiveness later. After our divorce, I secured a fair settlement for child support. However, the drama didn't end there. Brian later contacted me in a panic, worried that the client's president was demanding an apology from me, mistakenly thinking I had exposed the affair. This led me to ponder my past decisions. I then let Brian in on an unexpected twist. The truth about his affair unexpectedly came to light. As a car enthusiast, I had my car serviced at the client's auto parts company where his daughter worked. She recognized the car and uncovered the truth herself. Thus, I had not broken any promise to keep the affair secret. Brian's situation worsened as the mistress, upon seeing her supposed boyfriend's car at her father's workshop, realized the deception. After explaining the accident and the repair necessity to her father, the deceit unraveled, reaching Brian's employer and leading to his professional downfall. Facing the loss of his job, home, and reputation, Brian lamented his fate, a direct result of his actions and choices. I firmly ended the call, ensuring I blocked his number this time, and resolved to move on from the entire ordeal. As for Brian, his career and personal life spiraled downwards. He was fired for the scandal and financial misconduct, and with debts from the settlement, he had no choice but to leave his job. He and his mother, now financially strained, faced a challenging future, highlighting the consequences of dishonesty and irresponsibility. Meanwhile, Frances and I, unaffected by the turmoil, continued with our lives, focusing on her growing artistic talent and maintaining our well-being, supported by the understanding and care of my former father-in-law. After ending the call with Brian and making sure to block his number to prevent further contact, I later found out about the consequences he faced due to his actions. Brian was dismissed from his job not just because of the scandal, but also for misappropriating company funds. Instead of facing demotion as a form of penalty, Brian, already laden with debt from our settlement, had no choice but to resign. His mother, now reliant on him and unable to work due to their age, found themselves in a tough situation, forced to share a modest, low-cost apartment. The divorce had left them without any division of property, plummeting them into financial hardship. Brian's penchant for luxury, despite their dire finances, led to severe arguments and even police intervention. His mother had to take up part-time work, a grim reality for them, but given their prior actions, there was little sympathy from others. In contrast, life for Frances and me carried on smoothly. As the primary breadwinner, our lifestyle remained stable and secure. Frances's artistic skills flourished, and her grades improved notably in art. She expressed an interest in following a creative career, a choice I wholeheartedly supported, recognizing the challenges it might bring. Frances's recent achievement of securing first place in an art contest only reaffirmed her talent. Despite the divorce, Frances maintained a warm relationship with her grandfather, visiting him in his residence and keeping the family connection alive. I was thankful for my former father-in-law's support and hoped for his continued well-being. Now, it's just Frances and me, moving forward with our lives, unburdened by the past and looking ahead to a future filled with promise and the freedom to pursue our dreams.